Welcome, everybody, to the 20th episode of Stories from the Last Territory, a podcast that covers the golden years of wrestling in Puerto Rico. My name is Luis Cuevas, better known as the Caveman, and I'm your host for this trip back in time to the greatest feuds in the history of Puerto Rico. If you like what you hear and see, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or in audio as Spotify as Stories from the Last Territories. Today, we're going to be talking about somebody who took the island by storm, who became kind of like our superstar Billy Graham of the old WWF, but in Puerto Rico. And we're talking about none other than Steve DiSalvo, better known to the fans of wrestling in Puerto Rico as Sadistic Steve Strong, a man who in less than a year uh, had one of the greatest runs ever by a rule breaker or heel wrestler in the history of Puerto Rico, and to this day is still remembered as the man who took over the island, and he's still remembered to this day as one of the greatest wrestlers to ever step in Puerto Rico, believe it or not, even though he wasn't the most scientific wrestler that you know. The story of Steve DiSarvo is very interesting because looking for information about him before he came to Puerto Rico, he was trained by none other than the same people that trained Ultimate Warrior and Sting. We're talking about the Red Bastion and Billy Anderson in California, even though as Power Team USA, even though he later went to Calgary Stampede Wrestling in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and continued his training under none other than the Hart family, and that's where he first debuted. And I think he had his early success as a wrestler, both in Stampede and also in Montreal under the Loot promotion. By the time he came to Puerto Rico, wrestling in Puerto Rico had just finished one of the greatest runs of feuds in the history of Puerto Rico. We're talking about the Hercules Ayala versus Carlos Colon feud that had just finished in January of 1989. So during the next month and a half, there really wasn't anything exciting in terms of feuds for the Universal Heavyweight title. And there wasn't really a feud that you could say, wow, this is going to bring attendance back up. And they had Abu Dean, they had Jason the Terrible wrestling in Puerto Rico during that time. They had other stuff, but there wasn't really like a feud that you could say, you know what, this is the one that's going to carry wrestling in Puerto Rico during this time. And Steve Strong came to the island in late February. His first match was against Armandito Salgado in Carolina, Puerto Rico, in a card where he defeated Armandito Salgado. And after that card, he just beat everybody into Rufus R. Jones. Came to the ring with a chair and tried to interfere in his match, but it really had no success. And that set up a match for the March 4th card in Estadio Irán Bison, where that was like the main debut of Steve Strong during that time in Puerto Rico. During that time, there was an English program in Channel 13 called Champions of Wrestling, or Caribbean Wrestling, with Rick St. James. And an interview there, they set up who this Steve Strong was, and it was done by El Profe. He mentioned that this guy, he was afraid to talk about him because this guy was different. This guy was a satanic. This guy believed in the power of the dark side, that he had 666 on the side of his head, and that he was very afraid of what this guy could do in wrestling in Puerto Rico because he was aligned with the dark forces, with the satanic forces, and that he even, Profe, who had been a rule breaker during all this time, was afraid of what Steve Strong could do. And they aligned him right away with none other than Jason the Terrible. And they challenged for the World Tag Team titles, and they became champions by defeating the Batten Twins. But meanwhile, Steve Strong continued to dominate every baby face, and in every interview, he was talking about Damien, and he was talking about the power of Luke, and he had, a shoulder pad or an arm pad which and he looked very different. He was always talking about the dark side. He took Kevin Sullivan's gimmick of the dark side and he just run with it. He has 666. He was talking about, Satan and Damien and 666 and the power of Luke that was going to take over the island of Puerto Rico. And it was very interesting because during that time in Puerto Rico itself, there was like a big backlash against heavy metal music. When you were in school, they would bring these people in school and they will play the records backward, telling you not to listen to music, hard heavy metal music, because it was satanic. And they will bring the covers of like the Motley Crue, Shadow the Devil and Iron Maiden, the number 666, the number of the beast and stuff like that. And Steve Strong really captured that backlash that was going against heavy metal music, and it just attracted this whole bunch of young kids, including myself, who were like rebelling against whatever society was telling us not to do. You should not listen to Motley, and you should not listen to Iron Maiden or Metallica or whatever. But we're like, please. So Steve Strong kind of like became the anti-hero. He was the first anti-hero in professional wrestling in Puerto Rico, I think, where he was a bad guy, but we all thought he was super cool because he was talking about stuff that was dark and powerful, and they were telling us not to listen to and stuff like that. So we always thought Steve Strong was the best, and in that sense, I mean, in the ring he really wasn't that great, but his aura, though, his interviews, the way he talked, the way Cheeky Star and Prophet presented him as this very dark person that you should not be, you got to be scared of him, and it was pretty cool. I don't know. I just thought that, he took Puerto Rico by storm, and people kind of gravitate towards him because he was so cool compared to everything else that was going on in the island. And again, I think a lot of it had to do with the backlash. There was this thing called morality in media during that time that was very big against heavy metal music. And you have a whole bunch of people like me who were rockers, like, please, come on, man. What are you doing? What are you doing, man? But anyway, so he's Steve Strong, he started beating every baby face along the way, moving up the rankings and spelling his view that he had the power look that was going to help him, and he was going to take the Universal Heavyweight Championship. And he started challenging Carlos Colon, and I love the way they built this feud, because the way they started was like little by little. In every match, Steve Strong will attack the shoulder of Carlos Colon, and little by little he will start making effects, and that's how he won the title. Finally, when he defeated Carlos Colon in my home city in a match that I was there, May 27, 1989, he became the heavyweight champion by a stoppage, because he hurt Carlos Colon's shoulder, who had to do a surgery during that time, and it was a shock, because it's like, wow, finally somebody convincingly defeated Carlos Colon. I mean, there was no question that Steve Strong was the most dominant wrestler. And Carlos Colon took a couple months off, and I think it worked in the favor of the feud, and it worked also in the favor of Carlos Colon, because I think during this time, many people were starting to get tired of Carlos Colon. I mean, many people, it started with the Hercules Ayala feud. There were some people who, like me, who were, okay, I want Hercules to win. But this one was finally the first time that people were like, yeah, he lost. And smartly, Carlos Colon, took some time off. And, like Jim Cornette, I think is the one who says, how can I miss you when you never go away? Well, Carlos Colon went away, and surprisingly, attendance stayed strong during the Steve Strong reign. He fought everybody. He fought Junkyard Dog, who was doing a tour. Rufus Sergio. He defended the Universal Heavyweight title against everybody who he had beaten along the way up. Now everybody was gunning for Steve Strong, and he has some great feuds. One of them was against Invader One, Jose Vueltas, who finally was the first one to actually got the Giant in trouble, right? Because he gave him too hard punch, and Steve Strong fell down, and then that led to an interview, Steve Strong going and pushing Cheeky Star and saying that he wanted a rematch against Invader and stuff like that. He also had a great feud against TNT, and he finally established in my opinion, Savio Vega of TNT as okay, this guy could be the future because we saw a side of Savio Vega in this feud that was great. I mean, they had some great matches. There was a famous storyline where Savio Vega put the Cobra Crush on Steve Strong and will not let go. And he kept, and Steve Strong keep fighting and fighting and fighting, but TNT will not let go of the Cobra Crush, finally succumbing the Giant. And they had a great feud with people in attendance. There was also a great feud, believe it or not, against Abdullah the Butcher. There was a tag team match between Abdullah and Steve Strong, making a tag team against Junkyard Dog and Invader One in the city of Caguas. And in that match, Chiqui Star, who was the manager of both, tried to help Steve Strong and Abdullah, but hit Abdullah with a 2x4. This led to Abdullah attacking Chiqui Star, and of course, Steve Strong made the save for none other than Chiqui Star. And it was a great visual with Steve Strong just dragging Chiqui Star, who was laying to left for dead. And this led to a great match in Iran Bison Stadium with more than 20,000 people in attendance. This is the match that I always use as an example. Like, look, whatever they say about the Brody situation, it really didn't affect the attendance in Puerto Rico until later, because in '89, with Steve Strong as a champion, attendance was really, really good. And you could tell in that match, Iran Bison Stadium was packed. And this match was great. Two heavyweights just beating the living hell out of each other. And, it just was great stuff. And again, it was very different. You had a rule breaker, had a run without Carlos Colon in the middle. And the question was, who's going to be finally the man who's going to come back and defeat Steve Strong? And of course, it was none other than Carlos Colon who came back. And they had this great feud with Carlos Colon trying to defeat Steve Strong, but he couldn't. He tried everything. They had all kinds of different matches with stipulations into finally they got the match in anniversary '89, where, of course, it was moved a little bit because a hurricane in a barbed wire. And then that way, Carlos Colon, they had this match at anniversary '89. It was it's a barbed wire, and of course it ended with a little controversy that set up the rematch next day with a cage match. Carlos Colon recovered the title. They had a different matches. They had like a great Texas Death match where they in TV they explain all the rules and everything, and they were talking about all the different rules that the Texas Death match had, and that this was going to be the final battle. But of course, in that match, nothing really happened, so they had to redo it again. And this led to the final battle in November, where after the recovery from the hurricane and everything that happened, Huracan Hugo, they had the final match in Bayamon. And that match, finally, Carlos Colon defeated Steve Strong, and with the loser having to leave the island for good. And Steve Strong left the island, and he came back a couple times, but it's like one of those Terminator movies where the second parts are not always as good as the first part. Many people to this day think that he should have had a longer run as heavyweight champion, or that he should have had a longer feud with Carlos. That Carlos could have won an anniversary, but maybe Steve Strong could have kept the title for a while, especially because of what happened in 1990. 1990 was really, really bad in Puerto Rico wrestling. But '89, Steve Strong really helped Puerto Rico stay strong during a situation where, we still had the effects of the Brody assassination and everything that was going on. And here comes this guy out of nowhere that we had never seen, that, we were able to watch during that time, World Class, Jim Crockett. We were able to watch WWF, ICW, all these different territories, and we had never heard Steve Desire. When here comes this guy talking about, he has the power of Damien, the power of Luke, and that he, had the power of the dark side and everything, and the vignettes that they did for him with, in the satanic church and all that kind of stuff, and spewing and Cheeky Star and prophesying, this guy is the devil, and this guy is, we're even scared of him because we don't know what powers he has. It was so different, so cool. And again, he was like Billy Graham, where he just took over, and it should have been a little bit longer. At least his stay should have been a little bit longer in the island. But go to Armstrong Alley and go from February 25th, I think it's the first time that we see him on video, all the way to November 89. And his run is amazing. Just Google Sadistic on YouTube, and you guys are going to enjoy his run. Almost, 30 something years later, people still talk about him. It was funny. He came back in 1991 for AWF, and he had a very nice feud, but again, second part wasn't good. And then he came back early 2000 for the IWA promotion, and Savio Vega hired him and sight unseen, and they promoted the return of Steve Strong to the island of Puerto Rico, and he had been 13, 14 years, and people were very expectation of seeing this guy who revolutionized wrestling in Puerto Rico during this time. And when they made the announcement that he came out, it was like somebody had dropped a fart in the elevator, like everybody's like, who did this? I mean, everybody's like, yeah. Ooh, what happened? I mean, he came really out of shape. He didn't look nothing at all like the 6'5", 320 bodybuilder that we remember in 89. I mean, he looked awful, and he came in with sweatpants and a shirt. I mean, he really didn't look like the wrestler that we remember. So I remember that night. Back then we had wrestling forums, and people will come to those wrestling forums, and that's how you find out. And people will put pictures and videos or whatever they were doing. It was very popular back then in the Wild West of the wrestling forums. And when Steve Strong came back, it was like, oh, you guys shouldn't see them. That was the last time we saw him in Puerto Rico. And even Savio Vega has mentioned that he was surprised that he had asked him, hey, have you been in shape and everything? Yeah, work out and everything. But nah, that guy was working out some other way, but not in the wrestling ring. But his run in 89 is an amazing run. And I think everybody, he had a great match with Junkyard Dog. That's all I have to say in 89. He had feuds with Junkyard Dog, with Invader One, with TNT. That was great. With Carlos Colon, with Abdullah the Butcher. He was he refreshed the island for a little bit and took it away from Carlos Colon for a while. So check out Armstrong Alley again, anything 1989 with Sadistic Strong, and I think you guys are gonna enjoy it. Next, like I mentioned last week, because of work, I'm gonna be doing this every 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks we'll be back with our look at anniversary 87, probably the highlight of wrestling in Puerto Rico. Into that, please continue to visit on this page, and please share with your friends and everything if you like what you hear. Into next week, I say goodbye, saying like I always do, sayonara, amigos.